Hey guys, Alteryx here. Very recently I built something really cool in Alteryx for a client, and I figured I will show you guys. Essentially what we wanted to do is to create an Alteryx tool that calculates or actually performs sentiment analysis on text. In other words, what you can see right here is I have some text. I have sentences like I love cookies or I hate rainy days, which are inherently positive and negative. And I also added like this one phrase that was I don't always like going to the gym, but when I do I feel much better, which is kind of ambivalent. What we can do to make this a bit more interesting is write a sentence with some sort of negation, like I don't love cookies, right? So as humans we know that I don't love cookies should be negative instead of positive. But let's see what happens. So the first thing is I personally use a text input tool just because it's a bit easier than connecting to a data source, but really doesn't matter too much. And the second part that you're gonna need right here is to get an R tool. I also built a Python implementation of this same problem, but in the end we decided to go for R for the very simple reason that you can install packages using the R tool without having to be an administrator of your own computer. So that was ultimately the big thing. But if you like this video, happy to make some Alteryx Python videos in the future. So if you're not seeing the R tool, it's because you first need to install the predictive analytics suite, which is the one that comes with these machine learning tools and some other things that I personally never use. Right here we have like this empty canvas, and here's where you're gonna just run and type your R code. If you're not super familiar with R, well, luckily you can just simply type things like this, and Alteryx is gonna help you a little bit. For this problem we actually went for this code. I'm gonna copy and paste it and then explain to you what I tried to accomplish step by step. So if we check the first line, it says if not require sentiment R, then install the package. What this does is it checks if the package exists, and if it doesn't, it just installs it. Really straightforward. It's a R trick that maybe not too many of you know. Then immediately it calls the package, which in some cases will be installed, in some cases it will install from scratch. Now I just use Sentimenter because that's the package I know of, but maybe there is a better alternative, who knows. Once you call the packages that you need, and not that there was a particular order to do this, you need to read the Alteryx dataset. And for this is very specific R code that is only Alteryx specific. It says read.alteryx. In this case it says here macro input, but this is gonna fail because in this very moment my data source is called number 1. So right here, number 1. Let's just change this to macro input. I think it's a good practice to just simply have more explicit names than number 1, number 2, or so on. So yeah, I read it. Now I'm reading it as a data frame, as an R data frame, and that has one interesting consequence that I didn't know at the moment, and that is strings are imported as factors. If that doesn't ring a bell with you, that's completely fine. Just know that for sentiment analysis we need whatever column that we're working with to be text. So just to be 100% sure that it hasn't been casted as something else that is not a character, we just add here another variable called column, and then I do as character. What you notice right here is that it says text column, but if you check the name of my macro, this is here called my text. So for now, let's just change that. I'm gonna call it my text, and then it's gonna take from data frame the column my text and turn it into a character. Later, I'm going to show why exactly it was called that way. And then the parts that are coming next are very specific to this package. To just do sentiment by text. From there, I'm only curious about the sentiment average and the sentiment standard deviation. I'm going to append them into the data set. So this data set. Let's just run it so that you get to see how this looks like. It generally takes some seconds, but it shouldn't be too many because we're only doing this with 4 different texts. Well, maybe it's gonna take a bit longer than what I expected. Let's hope not too long. Okay, in the meantime, what I can tell you is what we're gonna do next is turn this into a macro so that we can reuse it. But I'm gonna head there. Okay, perfect. So we have here this text. This is, of course, what comes out of this tool. And if I click on this little one, I now see that the landscape has changed a little bit. Now, what exactly are these numbers? That, for your reference, is when you use an R or a Python tool, you are able to generate 5 different outputs. And in here, in my very last line, the one that says write.alteryx data frame 1, I'm telling Alteryx, please, from the very first output, I want you to show me this data frame. The output can be one value, it can be a whole column, it can be a whole data frame. In this case, I thought it would be easier to just have the whole data frame. And here we have it. We just build the basics of the sentiment analysis. If we look closely, this seems reasonable. Like, I like cookies is positive, I hate rainy days is negative. This phrase is, well, it says that it's rather positive, even though I would argue that it's rather neutral. But what is really fascinating about Sentimenter is that it was able to find out that I don't love cookies should be negative, which is something that not many sentiment analysis tools do. Okay, now we have it. This is our solution. How do we make this more reusable? We turn it into a macro. Let me just hide the code here for a second. And to turn something into a macro, what I do personally is step 1, I right click on my data source and I click on convert to macro input. What this means is that you can just connect it with anything. This is going to be kind of like an empty canvas / input. Some options is the very first thing it's asking you is, what do you want it to be the template? I'm gonna say, yeah, just whatever I had before, which is the 4 rows and the 2 columns that you see right here. This template is just for testing purposes. Nothing too interesting. Another best practice is to just maybe call it input. I like to leave an anchor abbreviation of I for input. It's not necessary. I just like to keep things annotated. Not a big fan of +1s and stuff. Okay, now we're gonna open the interface tools, and what I want to do is, in the case where the data source has multiple text columns, I want some sort of drop down. So let's just bring the drop down, in which I can select which column I want to modify. Right, so first things first, I need to drag this little arrow to the little thunder. This is gonna generate an action. If you're not familiar with how to create interfaces in Alteryx, I would definitely recommend you get their courses. Today I'm not gonna speak in detail about it, but just so you know how easy it can be. So now we have this drop down. And here, this drop down, I first need to specify a question. Let's go for something simple like select a column. Something kind of generic, specific enough. Now, I have all sorts of options here. We're gonna go later to that. What exactly do I want this action to perform? Well, I want it to go to this specific R script, and I wanted to replace a very special part of the whole text. So right now I hard coded in here the word my text. But what if I change this to text input or whatever it is, as long as I'm 100% sure there is never gonna be a data source with a column called text input in capital cases. If I come across that, well, too bad for me. But I think by naming it like that, I make the chances a bit less extreme. And then what I'm gonna do is, nope, I want you to replace this specific string. So now what it's gonna do is, whatever I select on this drop down, which we still have to configure, is gonna replace the little part of the script that says text input. And this is now gonna come back all the way here and affect this script. The final two actions that we need to accomplish is I need to drag this little question mark from the input to my drop down. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna feed information back to my drop down. So the drop down is gonna be automatically changing depending on which columns are present in my data. You're gonna see an example of that if that's not clear. Now here it's asking me, okay, show fields depending on the data type. And in this case, I do know that we need something like a string or a character for this to work. So I'm only gonna select these ones. Right, select a column, and then you can select anything as long as it's some type of string. The final thing that we need to do is to add a macro output. I have to make sure that it comes out in number 1, because I'm telling my R script to specifically output something from number 1, which leads me to the fact that it's possible to use an R or a Python tool that outputs multiple things. Like from 1 you get a report, from 2 you get this other thing. We're now gonna call it output. Now I think the most painful part for a lot of people, including me, is making sure that the tentacles, or at least these lines, look kind of reasonable. I hate having messy macros, but well, the truth is, if you have to use this input in the bottom and then this little tender in the upper part, something is gonna look like crazy. Okay, exciting. Now we're gonna save this. It really doesn't matter. I'm just gonna save it somehow. Did I save it? No. Okay, let me just... No, I think I did. Okay, perfect. Now I'm gonna open a new flow, and if everything worked out correctly, I can simply right click, insert, go all the way to macros, and there you have it. This one is called sentiment. Well, no, this one is called new workflow 2. I should have given it a proper name. And now we're gonna use once again a text input. Not a big deal. We're gonna add here a browse tool, just so that we can see the output a bit nicely, even though we also don't need it. And here I'm gonna let's call this text 1, and this is other text. In here I'm gonna write something like, hey party. I love Greek food. I do. I don't know what you guys. And then let's even out with something less positive. Like I don't like oh god. Let's say I don't like rice. I do like rice, but I couldn't think of something better. And I don't like getting sticky or dirty. I like to have my hands clean. And now I'm gonna click once again in the tool, and if everything worked out properly, we can see here in the select a column interface that we can suddenly select as many columns as we want, as long as they're text. And the living proof is I could add something that is not text, like some sort of numerical ID. And when I open it, it's still not recognizing it. Hi. Once I add a new column, so just that you know that it's still working. Now we see the other text. So really cool stuff. And now I'm gonna run this. It should take a while. Today, during this video, just to keep it short, I'm not gonna show you how to properly install this tool, how to add a logo, how to add documentation, or even how to create a nicer interface. But just know that all of those things are possible. And now, I know what was the mistake, and that is my R script doesn't recognize spaces inside of a text. This is something that I can correct very easily, but just for the sake of it, it should work now. So in case you're curious, the problem was that there is a space in the name of my column, which is of course not a crime, and there is a way to solve it in R. If I'm not wrong, it's with the special tildes. But for now, let's just check. And hey, it's working, which is really cool. So how do I fix this whole tildes issue? It's not a big deal. We just... let me make it slightly bigger so that we can see what we're doing. Once again, open it. And this is just something I happen to know about R. If you want to use a field that has a space, you need to add these little tildes in there. Right. So let's just recap everything that we have done so far. First things, we created a very small R script. And for those of you that are 100% familiar with R but not with Alteryx, there are a couple of things that are quite unique about doing things like this way. The first one is oh yeah, of course, because there is no column called text edit. But if we later try it in the workflow as a macro, it will work. So as a recap, we're using here the read Alteryx command. It's always a good idea to cast things as strings if you need them to work as strings, because the default with data frames is strings as factors. Don't need to worry if you don't know what that means. Here I have whatever is specific to my own implementation. In this case I'm doing this, and then I'm doing write.alteryx to output data frame 1 from the output number 1. What I then did is I transformed this into a macro by creating a macro input and a macro output. That's the minimum that you need for a macro to work. And then I decided to add this little tool here with a drop down to make sure that I can change this dynamically. Right here in my action, I change which part of the whole script I wanted to replace, so which part I wanted this drop down to affect. And right here in a new workflow, I'm able to right click, insert, find the macro that you want all the way in the end, and you get something like this. Now if I run it again, this should just run normally, right? Otherwise I will have to make a new video. Let's see the final moment of the truth. This is always taking so much. It's like it can smell whenever you're making a video. There you go. It ran, it finished. When we look at the scores, they seem to be working perfectly. So I'm quite happy with this implementation. Of course, if you want to make something nice, you probably would like to make this a bit prettier, a better implementation, more robust. But I just want to show you today how you can get started creating tools for Alteryx and some of the quirkiness of using R inside of Alteryx. If you enjoyed this video, there is going to be more content in the future. I wish you all a nice day.